The Federation of Associations in Behavioral and Brain Sciences, or FABS, is a nonprofit coalition of 29 scientific societies and about 60 academic departments who are committed to advancing the understanding of the mind, brain, and behavioral sciences. FABS is proud to inaugurate the Awards for Inclusivity, Diversity, Equity, and Accessibility, or IDEA Awards, honoring distinguished research, professional practice, and activities that advance these principles in the behavioral and brain sciences. The FABS Kalina Craig Henderson IDEA Award recognizes early to mid-career scientists who exemplify mentorship, service, and scholarship to advance IDEA goals in the brain and behavioral sciences. FABS has elected to name this award in memory of Kalina Craig Henderson, who served in many distinguished leadership roles for the Social, Behavioral, and Economic Sciences, or SBE Directorate of the National Science Foundation. My name is Jeff Sachs. I'm the president-elect of FABS and a professor and department chair of psychological and brain sciences at Washington University in St. Louis. And I'm thrilled to be able to introduce Dr. Jackie Chen, who is associate professor at the University of Utah, our inaugural winner of the Kalina Craig Henderson IDEA Award.
Thanks so much, Jeff. I'm really glad to be here.
How did you home in on the experience of multiracial people as a focal topic for your research?
So I, as a researcher, often look out in the real world and gain inspiration from the examples that I see or the events and the people that I encounter. And so in high school and in college, I knew a lot of multiracial people, and in my own family, there are multiracial people. And so I remember being in graduate school and learning about the impression formation process and these classic models of how we form an impression of others. At the beginning of those models, it was assumed that we would just automatically categorize people by age, gender, and race completely readily, that these are obvious processes. When I went to my advisor, Dave Hamilton, and asked, well, what if you can't tell what race someone is right away? He paused. And he said, I've never considered that question, but it's a really interesting one, and we should do some research on it. And that's how the research got started.
I think it's really valuable for young people getting into the field to hear these stories about where scientific problems come from. Because we have this, we have this process model that a lot of us are given that fits sometimes and fits less well other times.
Yeah, and I actually think there's fewer scholars writing review articles or theoretical models these days. There's so much data that's available to us. And so we hold up classic theories as if they're like gospel, but actually they deserve to be reconsidered and revised. And so I think young people shouldn't hesitate to think, oh, well, I have a different idea of how it would work, and let's work on that.
Part of the reason for your dramatic impact on the field was that this topic was little studied before you started to work on it. You really opened up a field. And I want to ask, was it scary going there? Was it scary going into an area where there weren't a whole lot of other people working and building your research program there?
I will say that I was inspired by scholars who are just a little more senior than me, like Diana Sanchez at Rutgers, who was starting to really push the field to consider these questions as well. During my time in grad school, some work was starting to come out. It was really exciting to think, well, I could study anything in this field and it would be pretty new. I think I actually look at, other fields where it's very crowded and you're almost trying to claw your way into having a contribution. And so for me, it was less scary actually to consider these new topics.
Let me turn to some of the implications of the work. In the practical domain, are there lessons based on your research that you'd identify as critical steps that institutions or organizations can take to foster a more inclusive and diverse scientific community?
The broadest lesson that I think my work illustrates is that our institutions and practices can inadvertently marginalize certain identities and experiences. And so thinking carefully about the policies we have, the norms and assumptions we have guiding us about social interaction and social relations is really important for fostering inclusion. And so that's like at a broad level, I think what my work tries to illustrate. In addition, I've argued that studying unconventional identities is actually really important for advancing our science. So in the multiracial perception space, a lot of this work by others and myself help to highlight the assumptions that Americans make about race every single day. We just aren't aware of it because when we don't have trouble placing people into racial categories and, you know, using those racial categories in social perception, then we don't question the assumptions. But it's illustrated well by understanding these like tough cases of multiracial individuals, that we actually have a lot of ideas about what race is and who's what race, like what it takes to qualify into a racial group and things like that.
Looking ahead, what are you most excited about with respect to your science, to the practice of science, or to both?
What I'm most excited about right now is understanding the interpersonal pathways to inclusion, because I think we know from a rich literature that intergroup contact really can help to break down barriers. So it can reduce prejudice among majority group members and increase inclusion among minority or marginalized group members. And so I want to understand more about what makes these relationships work versus backfire. And so one area that I'm really interested in is understanding what it means to be a good ally. We have initial work on allyship to the LGBT community, and I'm hoping to dive to kind of generalize some of this knowledge to other types of marginalized groups in other contexts. So how can a majority group member be a good ally? And then similarly, how can an individual be a good mentor across group lines? And so can a male identified STEM professor be a great mentor to a early career female identified student? I think yes. And I would love to provide empirical tools to help people who have the best intentions and just aren't armed with the findings and the knowledge. I think about addressing diversity on these multiple levels, like we talked about the intrapersonal level of social perception and how people see others who are different from them and maybe different from anyone they've ever met before. But I've also been doing some more recent work on interpersonal relationships and how those can foster inclusion. So how can we be good allies and how can we be good mentors? And I see those questions as really important to fostering inclusion as well. And then finally, at the institutional level, what are the policies that we can enact that signal inclusion and towards others? For example, same-sex marriage potentially signaling to LG Americans that they are accepted.
Are there lessons from the mentoring process that you'd like to share with mentors, particularly folks who want to make our science more equitable and inclusive?
Yes, I love that question. So I think right now I have 2 pointers. One is that first impressions are really important. So early career graduate students and their feelings about you as an advisor, about this mentoring relationship are really important. And they'll probably set the tone for the rest of graduate school. By the time, 3-4 years in, there's limited things you can do to change someone's impression of you as a mentor. So I think it's really important to start things off on the right foot. And I know as faculty that can be challenging sometimes because usually it's the beginning of the year, academic year, and you're scrambling for one thing or another, but kind of just taking a pause, saying like, oh, this is really important to like start us off on the right foot is one thing. The second thing I would recommend is really listening carefully to the student and what their goals and values are, and being a source of support for them in achieving those goals. And that sounds fairly obvious, but I think it's also a relief to know as a faculty mentor, you don't have to be everything to them. You don't have to be, supporting them through, you don't have to be like some, kind of mentor guru that knows everything and has all the right answers. But if the student feels that you care about them and you listen and understand their goals and you're trying to support them through that, then that perception can really do wonders. And actually in the initial work we're doing off of my NSF career grant, we don't find differences in how important these 2 points are for underrepresented and majority group students. So being a good mentor, in terms of our preliminary findings, being a good mentor is being a good mentor.
On this topic, have you experienced either as a mentee, as a mentor in your lab, or just as an observer, any particular success cases that you find especially inspiring?
So I think what I have seen in relation to my personal experience is the power of networking and the subtle signals that early career researchers have when they go to academic conferences. And so I was so fortunate to have mentors, not just my primary mentors in grad school, but older scholars, more senior scholars who would be very inclusive and friendly to me at academic conferences. And these, once a year type signals really helped me feel like I could belong in this field and I could keep going and be successful. And so I think that's something else that we underestimate as a non-primary mentor. If you're at a conference, if you go out of your way to just welcome someone or ask what their research interests are, what their goals are, that can go a long way to signaling belonging.
I think that's such a great point. That's actually a nice segue to the next thing I wanted to ask you about. What advice would you give to early career scientists who want to make a meaningful impact on diversity, equity, and inclusion in their particular fields?
I would say be true to yourself and contribute in the ways that speak to your strengths and passions. We may all have role models we look up to who seem like they're doing everything and they're so perfect. And you might think, oh, there's no way I can do all those things too. But even just contributing a little over time is better than not doing anything, or doing something that is outside of your comfort zone or outside of your passion is not going to be as rewarding to you. So find the ways that you want to contribute that's really true to yourself, and that's going to be the most rewarding and most sustainable over time, which is really what we're looking for, right? Sustainable change over time.
Well, Jackie, thank you so much for taking this time with us, and congratulations, and thank you for all that you're doing for our field.
Thank you so much for taking the time to interview me, and thanks so much to FABS for this great honor.